All right. Well, before I was in Kansas, I was in Mundelein, Illinois for almost 20 years, teaching at Mundelein Seminary, not too far from you there in Wisconsin. And always preferred to be on the other side of the Cheddar Curtain anyway, even though I lived in Illinois. So it was nice to get to see you tonight, even though it's the middle of the night over here. And what I want to talk about tonight is hopefully going to address some issues that people have about the objectivity of beauty. Beauty is one of those things that is a little hard to argue with people about because we think it's all in the realm of subjective perception. And traditionally, really until the 18th century, the 19th century, most schools of thought, or many schools of thought, were what we call in the realist tradition, which means that things have an objective character, whether or not someone's thinking about them, looking at them, whether or not someone has an emotion about them. And I think for anybody who's a Catholic, if you have a Catholic sensibility, you have to have a sense of the objectivity of things. God made the world, he gave it a certain order, people are people and ducks are ducks and trees are trees, and you can't argue that they're not what they are. Now, we might have trouble figuring it out, and that's a reasonable question to assess. But in our age, the objectivity of things is constantly being challenged. I have a feeling, my subjective response is dominant. And so hopefully what we'll have for you tonight is a little bit of apologetic, ideas that you can have good discussions with people. So let's see if I can get my PowerPoint to move here. Oh, there we go. So I had the unfortunate task of doing this little Google search called the most beautiful woman in the world. And this is what came up. Jennifer Garner is still around, and Jennifer Aniston a few years ago, and Julia Roberts, who I remember years ago was on the cover of magazines. This is what a lot of people think, that beauty is some kind of Hollywood glamour, and that's not what we'll be talking about today, because someone like this, Mother Teresa, probably would not be considered beautiful in the magazine covers of the world. And yet you can look at her and say, I see the beauty of her soul in her eyes, or I understand the beauty of her life. Of course, the Virgin Mary, not usually on magazine covers either, especially when it's something like this. If you really look at this icon, you see it's not actually that pretty. Mary's hands, look at those long fingers, and Jesus' hair is sort of all icons don't really look like people, although they're people. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too. So we have to ask this question: who's more beautiful? And how do you decide this? What are the criteria that are used? So, some of the questions that come up: what is it? Is it just a politically incorrect word? When I was in graduate school, we weren't allowed to talk about beautiful buildings, even though I was in an architecture program, because beauty was considered too subjective. And, you go watch HGTV and everybody's talking about, open floor plans and making houses that look like something that will sell. And a lot of times people just think that's what it is. It's in the market. It's something that rich people like. And then, more philosophically, is beauty in the eye of the beholder and therefore completely subjective? And can we even speak of objective beauty at all? And I'm going to argue that we can. And, if you want just an example of objectivity, just look at COVID, right? We can't subjectively decide that COVID doesn't exist or that COVID doesn't kill people. Science is a really objective kind of thing. Data is an objective, or data are objective things that we have to address and deal with. But one of the things about thinking and philosophically in the Catholic world is that we're caught in between these two things. The Catholic world is participating in an ineffable God. Ineffable means kind of beyond us, unknowable, insensible. And yet God chose to come take matter in the incarnation and make himself knowable. So this little red X's there would be the meeting space of heaven and earth. We also have all these spiritual realities that we know exist in the Catholic revelation. God's revealed, human philosophy is figured out, and somehow we have to get access to those. Christ present, the washing away of sin, we use matter to do that principally through the sacraments, Eucharist and baptism. So we're going to have a real sense of the objectivity of the Blessed Sacrament. And if someone goes into a church and doesn't believe that it's the Blessed Sacrament, that does not change the reality of the Blessed Sacrament. And so we as Catholics kind of have to hold on to that pretty strongly. When you think about what liturgy is, or the worship of the Catholic Church, there's this very clear one-to-one correspondence between things that are invisible in heaven, and you see on the right-hand side there, Christ is offering himself to the Father and offering us to the Father. God is all in all. In other words, God has restored everything with his divine life. We're singing with the angels and the saints. There's no sin, sorrow, or death. And if you look at the other side there on the left, the priest acts in the person of Christ. The Eucharist is this giving of Christ's own body. Liturgical art and architecture show us what that heavenly reality looks like. Liturgical music allows our ears to hear what the sound and the praise of God in heaven might sound like. Of course, scripture is the word of God, and then flowers and incense are things that bring us back to the Garden of Eden or talk about the garden of the heavenly future. And if we don't know the signs and symbols, we might not get it, but that doesn't change this pre-existing reality over here on the right side. There's lots of other things like this. Christ is called the Word of the Father. In other words, the revelation of the Father and the Father's ordering of existence. That's also called the Logos. On earth, we use little words and little logoi to use matter. So we're always caught between the invisible and the visible. And of course, God is the pure act of to be itself. And then we have our attempts at the fullness of being. But to see matter is showing up in every one of those examples on the left. But then when it gets to beauty, well, God is beauty itself. And then we try to make beautiful things in matter. And that's one of the fundamental attributes of the realist tradition, or what we're talking about today, the Thomistic tradition, that things have a nature, and whether or not someone outside of that thing is perceiving it does not change the nature. So, any sort of Wisconsin student is going to be dealing with all the current moral dilemmas that we find ourselves in, and that the Catholic Church kind of is a bulwark against. If you have an XY chromosome, you could say objectively you are male. Now the question of gender comes in, right? I think I'm a giraffe. I think I'm a person. Whatever my feelings are tend to be considered dominant over an objective reality. And this is the very discussions that are going on these days. What's marriage? What's a child in the womb? Is it a blob of cells? Is it a person? These are important questions. And so here's a little brief working definition of beauty. I'm not a philosopher. I'm actually a historian by training. But when I heard this, it helped me a lot. This comes from Thomas Aquinas. We call a thing beautiful when it shows a clear revelation of its full ontological reality. So notice we're talking about a thing involving an object that's separate from whether a viewer is actually looking at it at that moment. And so as soon as you start talking about ontology is the study of being. Ontos in Greek means being. So if it's being, when did it become? What kind of existence does it have? What kind of reality does it have? What are the categories of being? Is it a car? Is it a giraffe? Is it a person? Do you eat your dog? No. Do you eat chickens? Yes. And why is that, right? So as soon as you talk about the nature of things, the nature of being itself, then you have to start knowing what to do with that. So I just tell people add -ness to something, and you're talking about the nature of a thing, or the being of a thing, or the ontology of a thing. So a dog, to be a dog, has to have dogness. Liturgy has to have liturginess. Christ has Christness. And we can't redefine Christ, for instance. And so we keep coming up against this objectivity of the reality in the Catholic understanding of things. So here's my quiz. Really, so I can't really expect you to raise your hand, so I'll have to imagine how you're voting. But if I just asked you to look at this building and vote, whether it was a ski lodge, a museum of industrial history, or a Catholic church, you might have a subjective response to that based on whether you know the building, whether you don't know the building, what it looks like, what other things you've seen. Usually most people vote that it looks like a museum of industrial history. And then there's about, 15% of the group who thinks it's a Catholic church because they've seen a lot of ugly Catholic churches and assume this must be one of them. But, if I asked you the same question about this building in 2019, I don't think you'd have a hard time answering. You see, there's something in the object itself where the previous one doesn't let you know what it is, where this one pretty clearly reveals its own nature. And either it was a Catholic church and was used by something else, or it's still a Catholic church. And so you see this side-by-side comparison. They're actually both Catholic churches. The one on the left is the older one from 2010. The one on the right is the newer one, the new cathedral in Knoxville, Tennessee, dedicated just 2 years ago. So I found that one on the left on a website called Ugliest Churches in the World. This was number 20, so you can imagine maybe what the first 19 looked like. And the guy who made the website said Optimus Prime, goes here. So when you see Optimus Prime and you see this church and you say, okay, what is funny about a transformer? Well, it's a bus or it's a car, and then it becomes a robot. And this juxtaposition of opposites, this confusion about the nature of the thing is what makes them interesting. It's not very interesting when it comes to a church. Imagine, say, if McDonald's stopped making McDonald's restaurants that looked like McDonald's. Nobody would find the place, right? And the business would go down. So clarity of revelation is kind of an important thing in our in the realm of existence. Now, I know this is maybe a sacred question there in Wisconsin. Is this a Bears fan? And of course, you're all saying no. How do you know? Okay, well, you know because there's a cheese. That's not really cheese, right? It's foam that looks like cheese. Cheese is not a hat, and it's not even cheese. You see this as a kind of sign value of acquiring things that are kind of objectively absurd, right? To wear cheese on your head. But because he's got the G on his face and the cheese on his head, we know who he is. And that's how we know there's something objective about the reality that we see in his person or on his person. Now, if he is a Bears fan, then he's probably sneaking over to the Green Bay side to, cause trouble or something. So what do we know about this? To some degree, we have to know the signs of what all these things mean. On the other hand, we're actually assessing a real tangible thing. And that is the play of understanding, as we'll talk about it today. So, if I were to ask you, which is a more beautiful church, left or right here, you might have an emotional response. The church on the right is from the 1970s, and this was held up as kind of the model church in 1974, 75. And people who were older looked at the church on the left and they said, oh, I grew up in the 50s and the nuns were mean and they were preaching about hell all the time and they're hitting us with sticks and school and all this stuff. I don't like that old stuff, so therefore I want a big empty church. I would hear people say this. Well, okay, that's an emotional response of the subject, the viewer, the perceiver, but that doesn't change the objective reality. So we have to ask the question, which one reveals churchness more? If I ask which one reveals concert hall more, you might argue that the left looks less like a concert hall than the one on the right. But see, we're actually dealing with the material objective things in front of us, even as we have a subjective response to them. So if I did a little, brain experiment here and said, please draw a Procyon Lotor, how would you begin? The first question that would come to mind is a question about ontology. You might not think of it that way. What is a Procyon Lotor? And what are its characteristics? And so you see, before making a beautiful version or even an ugly version of a Procyon Lotor, you have to know what that is. And that on the left, a cute little icon, is a Procyon Lotor. So see where we've jumped right away. Assessing beauty presumes knowledge of what the thing is and therefore what should be done. All the arguments about human rights have been, these are human beings who deserve human rights. And the arguments always were, well, they're not really human or they're subhuman or we can enslave people, which is an anti-ontological reality, but it's an ontological argument. They're either people or they're not. So the beautiful thing, which reveals its ontology very clearly, has a relationship to what is true. Is it true that this is a raccoon? Yes. Well, it can't reveal its raccoonness if it's not a raccoon. So it has to be true and beauty together. So the one on the right, you see the elephant, has something that's true about a Procyon Lotor. It's got legs and eyes and a nose, but it's revealing a different ontological reality of elephantness. And I can't change that. I mean, I could be on drugs or I could, be drunk and not know the difference, but I can't change the object just by having a different subjective or emotional response to it. Now you can ask these kinds of questions too. On the left is the sort of popular hippie Jesus model, the Berkeley grad student model of Jesus, the long-haired hippie. On the right is at the Transfiguration. Now I'm not asking, which picture is more beautiful as much as which revelation of Christ in the world is more beautiful. The one that shows at the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor, his radiant divinity, in other words, revealing he's God, or the one that hides that he's God and is just his mere humanity. In this system, you would say, more about Christ on the right, because you now know he's not just a Berkeley grad student, but he's the second person of the Trinity come to earth. And so he was more beautiful, or at least the appearance, external appearance was more beautiful on the Transfiguration because it reveals more of who he is. So you can ask these kinds of questions all the time. Here's a mural in the cathedral in Wheeling, West Virginia, not too far from Steubenville. If you ever go out that way, you should stop by and visit. You ask the question, is this a beautiful mural for a Catholic cathedral? And how would you assess? Is it a distraction from the liturgy? it seems to be a little more fitting than for a Burger King. So already there's something about its own reality that is determining what we think of it. And so here's another little thought example. Several years ago, when I was teaching at Mundelein Seminary in the Chicago area, we had a couple of students die on the Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, and they wanted to make a mosaic out there near the accident site. And so the artist first came up with this drawing on the left, and then we asked them to make it more, quote unquote, traditional, and they came up with the one on the right. Now, the question is, do you just like old stuff, or is one of them more Maryness? So one of the arguments that was made was the one on the left was showing Mary maybe as a person on earth with a funny kind of, swords and heart in front of her, where the one on the right was showing her in a more elevated heavenly condition with her crown, with the gestures of her hands and the folds of her clothing being more perfected. And so the decision was that that was more true about Mary now, the Virgin Mary, as the Mother of God, the Queen of Heaven, and not just a woman from Palestine a couple thousand years ago. And so that the one on the right would reveal more of her nature and therefore be more beautiful. That's what the iconic tradition does. Now, of course, then they did it with a color, watercolor rendering. And you could say, well, that one's more beautiful too, because it's revealing even more. Now you know something of the clothes she's wearing, for instance. And if you know the tradition of icons, blue and red are symbolic colors. And blue represents creation and red represents divinity. So the Virgin Mary has blue underneath because she's human, but that she's clothed in the garment of salvation that Christ's divinity is sort of given to her, shared with her. The other way around, Christ wears red, covered in blue, because he was divine and then became human. And so you see how we're getting more knowledge of Mary, and you could argue in this system that that's more beautiful. So what are some of the reasons to care about any of this? I mean, a lot of this sounds like angels dancing on the head of a pin. But here's some further understanding about the realist tradition, the Thomistic tradition. Beauty is that about the truth which we find attractive, that which makes us delight in knowing the truth. So sometimes I'll say, beauty is to truth as delicious is to food. So there's no bottle of delicious that you buy at the store and pour in, but when everything is in the right place, there's an aroma, there's something delicious that you say, oh yeah, I want that. And it makes this food attractive. And beauty is that about the truth which is attractive. So someone can come arguing, like this guy with the sign, or you could just go love the poor. People will join Mother Teresa's order, give up their whole life because of the beauty of the truth of her life. So here we go. In order to know how to make or do anything beautiful, we have to find out what's true about it. So St. Louis on the left was a saint. He was a king. Darth Vader? No, neither of those things. And so to present him as a saint is not true, and therefore it becomes kind of a joke, or worse, right? It could be blasphemy. But if it's not true, then it can't be beautiful, even though it might be amusing or it might be interesting to think about. And so what we find here is that beauty is related to revelation. You see these two pictures. This was an old church, and then they built a new church, the same parish. And the first church, sort of brown, and a lot of people going to mass, but you can see there's not much more than this kind of factory building where people happen to go to mass. On the right, you start seeing stars and Christ and angels and saints, and it becomes more wider vision of the bigger notion of what the cosmic and heavenly dimensions of the liturgy involve. And so therefore, you could argue, is more beautiful as a church. The one on the left might be more beautiful as a assembly plant for something, and the one on the right would make less sense as a church because it's not revealing assembly plantness, it's revealing churchness. Now, what this all does is it requires intellectual inquiry and is still related to a person's emotional response. So there's kind of two ways of knowing in the Catholic view. One is knowing kind of in this broad sense. So you look at the Grand Canyon, you say, wow, that is this immensity of something that I don't understand, but I am in awe of this, and I just take it in all at once. And then you might read the Practical Geologist and learn, well, how did the Colorado River cut through this stone, and how many years did it take? And isn't that amazing? And so you can have an emotional response, which is totally legitimate in the Catholic understanding. We don't deny the value of the emotions, but we don't say that truth lies in the emotions. Emotions are, in fact, reactions to the truth when we see it. So here are some of these what I call complicated sounding theological descriptions of beauty. It's the power of reality to please when it's contemplated because it's delightful. It gives a joy in knowing. It's beyond the joy of just knowing, 2 + 2 = 4, but you're getting a knowledge of the deep understanding of something. And it exalts and delights the soul because it's given to the knowledge and the intuition of the soul. So there's a lot of things that please us physically, food or whatever, but it's not necessarily giving intuition to the soul. And it reveals this inmost knowledge of its ontological reality, which is a flash of understanding as God understands, or a flash of the divine mind. And that's a really important thing. Most of the world is, to some degree corrupted because of the fall. Our intellect is not very good at knowing things. I mean, anybody does homework knows it often takes work rather than just immediate understanding. But when a thing is beautiful, we get a flash of its higher existence as God knows it perfectly all the time. And so that delight that comes from beauty is actually this release from the effects of the fall, or this foretaste of knowing as the heavenly mind of God knows. And that's kind of a big deal. And if people find that delightful and attractive, then they're likely to want to do what's beautiful. So here you are as an apologetics club, right? You can tell the truth in a way that alienates people, hit them over the head with facts, or you can model the life of love that Christ brought to us so that someone says, wow, I really want that. I see something great in you. Even though you're just a person, I see something beyond you. And that's when you're starting to live beautifully, and people often find that attractive. So what we're talking about here is this realist approach. The beauty is, quote unquote, in the object. It's not a container for the object, but anything that the object reveals is somehow bound up with the material reality of the thing. So I had a professor in graduate school named Bill Westphal. You see this as Westphal saying, who used to say, if a beautiful thing is beautiful and you do not know it, then you and not it are deficient. Which I always thought was, slightly insulting at first. But then I thought about it and I was like, yeah, that's true. You take an 8-year-old through the Louvre or, some museum here in Florence, and they're not ready for it. They're just bored. And Mom, when do we leave here? They're not ready for it. So they have a certain deficiency in their ability to perceive, but that doesn't change the thing that's perceived. So you see, beauty is a quality of being. The thing has to exist in order to be beautiful. And everything that has being is beautiful in some degree. The only non-beauty is to go out of existence. So you could even say Satan has a certain beauty because even the devil is still participating in existence, even though he's not using it very well. And here's the important line, because people often say, well, a slug is beautiful, a chimpanzee is beautiful, a person is beautiful. Aren't they, all the same? But here's this: the degree of beauty is in proportion to the perfection of its being. So in other words, capital B, being, existence, God itself, fullness of being, cannot kind of go on a sliding scale. A person has intellect and will, a rock does not. And so it actually has more being or higher participation in the being of existence. And so not all things are equally beautiful. So what I've been saying here, beauty is constituent of things. I mean, objective reality. This is what we talk about. If it's objectively beautiful, it means the revelation of its ontology is in or revealed through the object, but it has a subjective relation to us. And this is where we get this notion of beauty in the eye of the beholder. But I want to take you through, a kind of interesting idea here. Where is beauty located? Most people would say, oh, if I have a feeling when I look at something, it's beautiful. But in this system, beauty is perceived in the mind. Why is that? Because ontological reality is perceived not by the emotions, but by the mind. Remember the Procyon Lotor, the Green Bay guy with the cheese on his head. Is that a Green Bay guy? Well, I don't know. What do they wear on their heads in Green Bay football games? Oh, cheese heads. Yes. See, my emotions are not doing that decision-making. It's in the mind. The beauty, so to speak, is located in the object and then secondarily in the mind once the mind knows it. But that's the play. Beauty is perceived by the mind, located in the object. And this is how we have the objective notion of beauty. And beauty is an objective intelligence. The mind knows it. This is not the same as I like it, right? Because we like lots of things that are bad for us, and we don't like lots of things that are good for us. And we have to let the mind actually work this out. So, you see a simple question like this: is a poorly designed building made of shoddy materials and has no altar suitable for a new cathedral? Well, you could be mad about that, but it doesn't really answer the question. You have to say, what's a church? It has permanence. It's around for a long time. It's important in society. It's built around the altar. No, that's not a beautiful cathedral. It's not suitable. And then you see the beauty is being perceived by the intellect. And the natural state of all this, of course, is the intelligible world. And one of the classic kind of anthropological statements of Thomas is the mind is made to delight in the beautiful. So your tongue is made to delight in a nacho or something, right? The mind is made to delight in the beautiful. When your stomach is empty, it's not happy. When it's full, it's made to delight in that. So the mind has this capacity to delight in the beautiful and love the good and know the truth. So here's one of the famous things that comes from Thomas, and this might be helpful. The constituent elements of beauty, or his famous triad, that anything that is beautiful has to have all three of these things. The first one, integritas, we translate in English as integrity, but it means wholeness, completeness, or perfection in being is really the important thing. So you can imagine if a thing has perfection in being, by definition, it's revealing or has the capacity to reveal something beautiful. Consonancy is the second one, and it just means proportionality. If you think con and sonare means to sound with or sound good with. And proportions come in all kinds of things, height to width. Is this microphone proportional to my speech? Is that screen proportional to the camera? All that kind of stuff. But there's other ones. Is this proportional to its end, its ultimate final reason for existing? So you might not have a gold-plated toilet seat, but you might have a gold chalice, right? One's proportionate and one's not. And then the third one is it has to have claritas. That's the power to reveal its ontological reality. So it might have wholeness and proportionality, but it might not have the capacity to reveal it. So there's a kind of old movie now. I don't know, maybe some of you have seen it. It's called Hollow Man. It stars Kevin Bacon. And he's this kind of semi-mad scientist who invents this invisibility injection. And they put it in him and he becomes invisible. And he goes around causing trouble because nobody can see him. And he has integritas because he has all of his parts, and he has proportionality because they're all in the right place, but it doesn't have claritas because nobody can see them. And that becomes the plot. And so you need all three of these things. So another question is God in relation to these three things. Does God lack anything? Of course not. Are the persons of the Trinity proportionate to each other? Yeah, they're one to one. It's completely begotten. And then they have the capacity to reveal themselves, obviously, because the Son, Christ, made the Father knowable. Now, another question that's a little harder for some people is the crucifixion beautiful? Some people call this divine child abuse. What kind of God would send his son to die on a cross? And so there's the famous Matthias Grunwald altarpiece where Christ's suffering is really shown in a very dramatic way. This was actually in the chapel of a hospital that had patients with very severe skin diseases like leprosy. And so you see Christ's body really racked by disease and pain. And so it's supposed to show that he understands, their way of suffering. And so the question is this beautiful? Well, here's how we can start to answer that. Here's the famous phrase from Thomas, pulchra decuntur que visa placent. Literal translation comes out as beautiful are called things which, when seen, please. And this is where we get the subjective, or at least the modern view of the subjectivity of beauty. When we have a feeling, they are called beautiful. But I'm going to propose a little alternate way to see it. But things which implies that they exist, right? It's integritas. And when they're seen, here's the confusion. Visa is the conjugation of a verb that can mean two different things, or two different infinitives. One is videre, which means to perceive with the eye. You see stuff with your eye. You're not really paying attention. So, sometimes you drive home and you're looking at the road, but you're thinking about something else. And you don't even realize you're looking. You just don't crash. It's the sense impression in the eye. Viscere is to contemplate the depths of something. It's ontological reality. So the question is, both can be conjugated as visa. And so which verb is it? The modern world has tended to see the first one. If you look at something and you have a pleasing feeling, that is beautiful. But as you read Thomas and you see how he uses this verb in other places, contemplating the depths of something and having the mind delight in the truth of the ontological reality of the thing is really the verb that's at work here. And so, if you get into this discussion with someone ever about beautiful things being purely subjective, to have that ready to go is kind of handy, because things that please us are consonant with our nature, because we live, ordered toward the good. In this sense, if you say, well, it just pleases me, then it could be pornography, it could be whatever, right? Being pleased by things is not necessarily the same thing as being ordered toward their good. So what do we have here? Well, exercise. Okay, so there's a little cheat sheet on the right about integritas. And normally I like to open this to the room, but I can't do that tonight. So you can just look on the right, and which one of these is the problematic one? If a gazelle has no legs, pretty straightforward, right? It's an integritas problem. It's not complete. But you can also see that the gazelle is supposed to have legs, and the legs are proportionate to the other parts of the body. The gazelle with legs is proportionate 1-to-1 to the idea of a gazelle. And so you see consonantia falls away when integritas falls away. And if it doesn't have its legs, it can't reveal legs. So it also, claritas, goes away or reduced as well. Now you see a slug with no leg doesn't matter, because they're not supposed to have legs. And if a slug had legs, that would actually be a hindrance to understanding its ontological reality. So that is not a deficiency in a slug. Now, church without an altar obviously is an integritas problem and also a consonancy problem. Urbs Beata Jerusalem is a song about the beautiful city of heaven. They sing it at the dedication of churches. And if the music for it is chaotic and discordant, you're banging your fists on a piano, you can see that would not be proportional to the words, which the words are about the perfect laying of the stones as God does this and, bringing us to heaven. If a church looks like a ski lodge, well, it might have a lot of things and it might be proportionate, but it doesn't look like what it is. It's sort of missing some stuff. And of course, a well-composed hymn to Satan, as blasphemous as that is, right? You can have a really great musician do something really not proportionate to its end, right? It's not consonant, it's not proportionate to the use of the time and effort of singing. So, one of the fellows who wrote about this in the early 20th century was a guy named Jacques Maritain, and he makes the point that in beautiful things, the mind is spared the least effort of abstraction. Abstraction means looking at lots of examples and figuring out the nature of something. So if you had only seen one, mobile phone in your life, you might think they all looked like flip phones from the 90s. But then you've seen, iPhones and other kinds of phones. You say, okay, I'm getting phoneness by looking at lots of examples. But he says when things are beautiful, it reveals its ontological reality. So clearly, you don't have to do any work. If you've ever been to an ugly church and you drive up and the sign says whatever, Catholic church, and you look at the church and you say, that's the church? The sign says church, but it doesn't look like a church. It looks like a Burger King. And, you see the mind is doing all this work trying to figure it out. If you see a beautiful church, you just say, oh, there's the church. And you delight in it. And the mind can rest. And the nature, the fallen nature, the fallen mind, inability to understand is in some ways undone. And it's excused its customary task of doing all this work. What people say is the reality of the object is so evident that you don't have to ask, what the heck is it, right? If your church or your vestment or your music at Mass doesn't pass the what is it test, then something's wrong. And here's an example, right? 2 crucifixes. One's in England from the early 20th century on the left, one's more modern on the right. And if you were to ask yourself, how would you determine which one of these is more beautiful? The first question always is, ontologically, what is a crucifix? And how is a crucifix used liturgically? And so on the left there, the Apostle John there has gold in his hair and gold in his clothes, and the cross has gold leaf on it, and the loincloth has gold leaf on it. And it's dressed up as if it's in heaven, even though it's representing an earthly act in time. So it's saying the crucifixion as an event is not only an earthly thing, but it's a heavenly thing. It's Christ offering himself to the Father forever. And so this is showing the heavenly reality of that. It's made of car parts, and you get the basic idea of it, but Christ wasn't made of car parts, right? And so was he a machine? No. Why are we making him look like a machine? Well, because that's what modern artists do. But you see, it's not really revealing the nature of crucifixion as well. And you could say in this system, you could say it's less beautiful. And so is everything equally beautiful? Is a slug equal to a person? Here's that quote again. A thing is most beautiful in direct proportion to its perfection in being. A person has a higher participation in God's being than a slug. A slug has more than a rock. And so, of course, being itself is God, and human beings have the highest potential for perfection of being because we have more of being made in God's image and likeness. So here's an example that I like to use. You can have a big glass and a little glass, and St. Therese of Lisieux was famous for saying she was a little flower. She was perfectly happy being a little flower. She was full as a little flower. And she said, I don't have the capacity to be filled with these great realities like St. John of the Cross. I'm just happy being a little flower. So the little white flowers on the right, they're great. They're awesome. They're called baby's breath, and they're really nice. The roses, however, have kind of a different ontological reality, whether you consider it more. And they're both content theoretically. And so the more it has the capacity to be filled with divine life, the more beautiful it is. And here's an old chart that I found in an old philosophy book. It's called The Powers of Man. And you can see at the top are intellect and will. Rocks don't have that. Plants have will to a limited degree. But a rock doesn't, I looked at the bottom, a rock doesn't have nutrition, growth, reproduction. You see all these other senses and feelings there, estimation, memory, imagination. So the rational powers are the most like God. If you work down the chart, you could say are less beautiful. Now, doesn't mean they're not beautiful. Marble is awesome, right? But it's not going to make little baby marbles. It's not going to love or hate or have aversion or courage or hope or intellect or will. We're talking about goodness, and then higher and lower, or I should say more full and less full participations in goodness. So I'm not setting up a good versus bad understanding here. So let's look at the liturgy for a second. What is the nature of the liturgy? Vatican II says the liturgy and its art should be signs and symbols of heavenly realities, a foretaste of the heavenly liturgy. In other words, a sacrament of heaven. So what's heaven like? You don't have to ask, be a rocket scientist to figure this out. Is it ordered or chaotic? Well, ordered, right? Because God has restored everything to perfect order. That's consonancy. Centered on God, not centered on me, because it's proportional to God receiving our praise. It's radiant with the light of Christ. That's claritas. It's intelligible because God is making all things known to us. That's claritas. It's populated with angels and saints and all of creation, and hopefully us. And so there's integritas. And it's not lacking anything. That's integritas again. And everything is joyful, right? So that this full delight in understanding and participating in being is evident in the heavenly things. So when you look at the book of Revelation, where it's described what heaven looks like, St. John has this vision of heaven. He sees the white-robed elders, and he sees these winged creatures and gems. The white elders are there. The white-robed elders are there. Golden crowns on their head, and then these four creatures that are the four evangelists. And then all these people, right? This is integritas. What's heaven like? It's glorified, it's perfected, it's centered on Christ, and it's full of people. And you can see when you go to a church, this is in the Eastern tradition, they're very big on this. Everything is glorified. You see this notion of gold, reflectivity, gem-like color. They're holding this little canopy over the altar at the Eucharist because the canopy marks the wedding spot of heaven and earth. And little plants woven into the fabric because nature will be glorified again at the end of time. And you get this in Western Church too. This is Pope Francis at Easter. I mean, just look at those candlesticks. My goodness, just one of those. How much work would it take to get one of those? So this is not just some little, flashlight or the flashlight option on your iPhone on the altar. Everything's brought to this higher level of existence because this is what heaven is like. And you can see in there with the incense. And you see that in the book of Revelation too. They're golden bowls of incense that are the prayers of the saints, and they sing this new song. So when you talk about liturgy, it's not, I like old stuff or new stuff. It's what is the nature of the liturgy and how do we know? And part of what we know is from Scripture. And what you know further from Scripture is that the walls of heaven, as you can see, they are made of these gems. And there's a long history that gems have in Scripture. In the Temple of Solomon wore the gems on his breastplate with the names of the 12 tribes, and that stood for all the people. The Jews were, stood for all the tribes of the Jews. They stood in for all of humanity. And then, they're succeeded or fulfilled by the 12 apostles. And so what you find out is in the Bible, stones are people. Those people brought to glory are gems. And so when Paul says you're living stones in the temple of God, there's a long history to that, to being compared to a rock, and you can see why. A diamond is different, chemical structure, but basically it's carbon. Aluminum oxide with a little nitrogen starts out as this lump of gray stuff over here and then becomes a ruby. So what you have is matter on one side, somehow it's transformed to glory, and think of yourself, matter plus grace equals a saint. A saint is the living stone, and the church building is an image of those assembled. So sometimes you see quite literal representations of heaven as being made of these gems, and this is what the church building is supposed to signify. So here we're talking about the nature of things. And what's liturgy like? It's festive. It's the celebration of the unity of heaven and earth. So if your liturgy or your church is drab, boring, not festive, not radiant, not colorful, not full of flowers and incense and song, outside of Lent, of course, then something's not being represented as fully as it should. And so here's this notion of stones again. There's one of the songs or one of the prayers for the dedication of a church prays that all here present be hewn, that's shaped and dressed by God's hand. And you can see if you're out of the quarry, so to speak, or out of the womb, you have to get shaped little by little. Mom says, sit down, be quiet, eat your vegetables, don't hit your sister, go to school, go to church, go to confession. That's all shaping us. And the building signifies that. So here you see the topology of church architecture, and you start to see it now when you look at the great floor of a great church with like little pieces, or even a mosaic is made of many little stones, and when they're assembled, they make the face of Christ. Just as many Christians who come to church act as Christ or act as Christ in the world. Or even the new altar being made there at the bottom right, doing that same kind of thing. So what do we know? Church building has lots of theological importance. So this is St. Paul outside the walls in Rome, and you can kind of see, okay, is this a beautiful mosaic or not? The first step is, what is it a mosaic in a church? What does it do? Well, it shows us the vision of heaven, Christ on the throne, surrounded by angels and saints, and the palm trees of paradise are there. If you look closely at the bottom center, right by Christ's right foot, you can see there's a little guy down there dressed in white. That's Pope Honorius III, who put the mosaic in the church. He's revealing the nature of himself in relation to Christ. Even though he's the Pope, he's a little guy, and you see his left hand is right under Christ's fourth toe there. But look what the seat appears to be made of, little sapphires and emeralds and plants and leaves and flowers. And this is the new heaven and the new earth. So when you talk about something like this, it's not just old, it's actually beautiful in the sense that it reveals the nature of what a church is. This can be done in other mediums or other idioms. This is a quite well-known cathedral in Vietnam from the 19th century, and they wanted it to look like their local custom, but you would never confuse it for anything that was unimportant. You see the heaven, the earth, the plants, the leaves, the saints, but in this kind of local language. So imagine going to Mass in Vietnamese and then seeing the church, a vision of heaven in a Vietnamese idiom in architecture. Now, what happens is you make something like this. This was the heady days of the 70s, before my time, but there's a magazine called Liturgical Arts, and this was a house in Louisiana, I think. And they wanted to go back to theoretically the simplicity of the early church, which says the apostles broke bread in their homes. And you can see the quote, the small church of the future where the stylistic triumphalism of the past would give way to a more sensible solution. Ontologically, they don't know what a church is. So they've mismatched house for church, and that becomes a problem. This is another example. This is an altar that won an award from some liturgy committee somewhere. And the person who made it said, well, we're all broken. We still live on earth, and we still sin, and we're broken. So we're going to make the altar look like us. Now, if I asked you if that was a beautiful altar, you might have a gut reaction like, wow, that's a cool idea, or whoa, that's a stupid idea. But you got to put your ontological hat on. So what's the first question that has to be asked? Whenever you ask, is it beautiful? You have to say, what is it? And is it revealing that? And what the church teaches is that the altar is Christ. The altar is the resurrected Christ standing in heaven, but come to earth and standing amidst his people. So then you could say, well, is this revealing Christness very well? Is it revealing the resurrected Christness? And then in this particular system of understanding beauty, you can make a claim one way or another. But notice, this is something you can argue with someone. You can't argue over your favorite color, but you can argue about whether or not this is revealing Christness very well, especially if you compare it to something like this. This is the altar you saw a second ago under construction, and here it is done. And you can say, oh, is the alterness of this altar clear, evident, and on display? So you have the slab on the top, which is called the mensa, and then the columns that suggest it's a table. So the tableness of the altar is there, the sacrificeness of the altar is there, and then it's made of all these little stones, just like the great biblical tradition of the gems. And you could make the claim, oh yeah, the alterness of this altar is superior, and therefore it's more beautiful. So I wanted to, we're going to wind down here soon, but end with a little, music exercise. Is this a proper liturgical text for singing? Glory to the Jayhawks in the highest, and death to God's people on earth. Of course not. Why? It's not true, first of all, and it's also not proportionate to the liturgy. The liturgy is not about, Kansas sports teams, and it's not about God bringing death to people. Now, there's a lot of kind of emotional songs that we sing in church a lot. Lord, I need you, especially if you go to sort of praise and worship style singing. I feel really sad today. My wife left me and the house burned down, right? I mean, this sort of country song. Not very liturgical though, right? You can pour out your feelings to God anytime you want and say those words. But by definition, liturgy is communal, and not everybody has that situation. There's another one, look beyond the bread you eat, see your Savior and your Lord. This was popular 15 years ago or so, maybe not so much anymore. But you can see there's some theological problems there, right? Look beyond the bread you eat to see your Savior and your Lord. A Catholic would say, that's not beautiful text, because we don't eat bread in the Eucharist. It's not bread anymore. It's in the appearance of bread. So we don't have to look beyond it. We can actually see it to find our Savior and our Lord, not beyond. First, not bread, and second, we don't have to look beyond it. And then look at, somehow number 4 disappeared, but look at number 5. You are God, we praise you, you're the Lord, we acclaim you, you're the everlasting Father, all creation worships you. Ah, yeah, then you can say, yes, what do we do in liturgy? We praise God. We bring all of creation's voice to God. We speak of God's reality, and you say, yeah, that's a proper liturgical text. And of course, you'd want it to be proportional to the music that goes with it. So you can imagine, pick a melody, glory to God in the highest and peace to his people on earth. It just doesn't quite work. People do that as a joke sometimes with like the Star Wars theme, Kyrie eleison, eleison. And it's funny, right? But it's not funny. It's absurd. Here's the thing. Music clarifies the text. This is why St. Augustine says he who sings praise twice, because the music contains information. If it's upbeat, if it's mystical, if it's spooky, if it's happy, you don't even know the words yet, but you're already getting the content of the prayer if it's done right. And if it fights the content of the prayer, then you're not only not praying twice, you're sort of praying less than once. So here's, I shouldn't be using this during Lent. Sorry, maybe you'll excuse me for saying the A word in Lent. I should have thought about that. This is Regina Celli. This is the Easter season Marian hymn at night prayer. And it's Regina Celli, Queen of Heaven, rejoice, for he whom you're worthy to bear has risen, as he said. Pray for us to God. And notice it's punctuated by the A word every time. So it interrupts the flow. Like Easter joy is so great, they have to say it again and again and again, even though it interrupts the flow of the line. But look at the music. Regina Celli letare. So we got a lot of notes there, right, on letare. Letare means rejoice. Why so many notes? Couldn't you just say Regina Celli letare and be done? You could, but notice Regina Celli. The word is Regina, not Regina. So the notes are actually putting the accents in the right place. And then Celli goes up to heaven, and then letare, a lot of rejoicing. So there's a lot of notes. You see it down here in the same way. Portare, that you carried or you bore in your womb, goes portare. So you can see those two portare, and that's the same movement of notes. Da, 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 da. And then the same one again. Da, 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 da. Sometimes they call this the Holy Stutter, that when you're in the face of magnificence, all you can do is stutter. You look at the face of God and you're like, holy, 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 there's nothing else I can say. And so repeating the word is a way of emphasizing how important it is. And you can see how this is related to beauty, because it's bringing out the nature of the ontology of the word laetare. If rejoice didn't sound like rejoice, or didn't indicate the importance of rejoice, it wouldn't be very beautiful. Or the notion of how important it is to bear the Christ. And you see resurrexit does the same thing. Resurrexit, sicut dixit. Resurrexit comes up, as he said, comes down, as Christ speaks to us. And it's beautiful there. You can see it also in other places. You know, this is Handel's Messiah. Every valley shall be exalted. In other words, order will be given to the world again, Consonancy. The mountains will be low and the plains will be high, and the rough places plain. If you know this song, you can actually imagine drawing a line through this. And every mountain and hill made low. You can see it goes right up mountain, and then hill made low, the crooked straight. So I actually drew a little diagram of this. If you know the full song, it goes like this. Shall be exalted, but a lot of notes up there, alted, and every mountain and hill made low, the crooked straight, and the rough places plain. So on the bottom line there, these little dots, that's the rough places, and then the plain you can see right there. So is this a magic trick? No. Does the music actually add to the revelation of the meaning of the words? Yes. And could we say therefore increases its claritas? Sure. And therefore is more beautiful. So when you look at a well-made icon, the saint is shown with this kind of heavenly peace and harmony and gestures that are like ballet for the hands. You see a not so well-made icon, you know, it's a good try. This one on the right was on eBay for $1,800. I don't know if they got a sale. It doesn't convey the perfection of the heavenly condition. And we could do this, you know, all day. Here are some statues in churches that don't really look very heavenly. They're just like regular people. That's supposed to be the Virgin Mary on the left, and there's a long story why it looks like it looks, but regular person. Nobody prays at this statue on the right in this church in Naperville, Illinois. Nobody lights candles in front of it. It's kind of a strange little Bible history museum piece, and it kind of gets ignored precisely because it's not revealing much of the heavenly condition. And it can get quite abstract. This is a Marian shrine in Seattle, I believe. And they said it looks like Mary because it's got the general outlines, and the bowl represents source and milk represents flow. But it's not Mary, right? It's a bowl on a rock, and it's missing Queen of Heaven, her humanity, her face, her hands. So there's a lack of integritas, wholeness, and then there's lack of clarity there as well. And I always find it interesting that the little quote under the picture there says, the new and unconventional Marian sculpture is examined by this lady, not kneeling. She's examining something unconventional. And then, you know, well-intended, hyper-realistic things like this. Is this two saints in heaven? Well, they're kind of two guys in earthly clothes with the sky in the background, as opposed to letting, you know, heaven actually come through them. Well-crafted thing, but maybe less beautiful than if it was actually capturing their heavenly reality. So we can do this all day. But let me just end with this. The effects of beauty. And why does it matter, especially if you care about apologetics and about convincing other people of the faith? It makes the truth attractive. If you wanted to sell, you know, cookies, you better make them delicious. If you want to sell the truth of the faith, you have to make it attractive. Because when something is beautiful, it stirs desire in us. It moves our will toward the good. So, you know, the classic story, their eyes met across a crowded room. And what was it? I saw the beauty in this woman's face, and I said, I have to marry her. And then they walk across the room, and it moves their will. And the movement of the will toward the good is the traditional definition of love. So beauty makes us desire the good, which means move our will, and that's what we call love. Love for ourselves, love for God, love for the good, love for the other. And we move out of ourselves. That's what ecstasy is. If you know, like stasis in physics, ek is out of, and stasis means standing outside yourself and toward the good. And so this is the plan for all of us, right? What do we take from this? Beauty is not a worldly overlay of glittery fanciness. It's a flash of understanding which approaches the divine mind. So it doesn't have to be Martha Stewart or HGTV or whatever. It reveals what God desires that we should be, restored in divine life, it makes us want to partake in the riches of the liturgy because those are the things of heaven. That's what we call active participation. And it's very close to the idea of sacramental participation, because one of the standard Catholic lines is sacraments confer grace by signifying. When you pour the water on someone's head, the baptism happens. It's the signification of pouring water that confers grace. And so we're talking about beauty as something that signifies, reveals the heavenly reality. And so here we go. Last line. John Paul, in a letter to artists, said, beauty enthuses us for work. And if you look at that word, en plus theos is where we get the word enthusiastic. You have God put in you and makes us motivated to do the work of prayer. And when we pray, we become raised up to God, holier, happier, more loving, more careful about the being stewards of creation, more careful about human life, more careful about all those wonderful things because we've been transformed through that. So I know there's a lot to take in pretty quickly, but I'm happy to have the chance to talk to you today. I think we have some time for questions. I guess, Augustine, are you in charge of how that works?
Thanks, Dr. McNamara.
Sure.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, you can come up here. I'll give you the microphone, point the camera toward that. He can see you. And yeah, anybody?
Dr. McNamara, thank you for your time. So just what do you think the best move is for making the church beautiful in general, in particular the liturgy? Just because we were kind of debating the other day in Apologetics Club whether you want to go full on TLM, or is that going to be less claritas since people might not be able to perceive it? So I don't know if you have any wisdom about the best, like for the good of the church and the future of the church and evangelization, if you have any wisdom about that. We were kind of debating it, and kind of our conclusion was that we tried the other thing and it was a complete disaster. So maybe go on full back to pre-1970. So.
Okay, well, good question. This is the kind of thing I think about a lot. I actually teach a class at Benedictine on what's called the Liturgical Movement. So this is the theology of liturgy up, leading up to Vatican II. And when you read what they said, there's nothing contrary to the nature of the church. There's nothing contrary to the nature of the liturgy. So what they did recognize, though, was there were accidents of history that made the liturgy what it was, that maybe didn't allow the fullness of the liturgy to come forward. So, for instance, in the 1950s, even before Vatican II, they revised the Easter Vigil. The Easter Vigil used to be at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the Easter Vigil is all these language about light and darkness and Christ our light, and the Paschal candle comes into the darkness and all this stuff, and the Exultet is sung. And they did it at 8 in the morning. And it was an accident of history that it moved to anticipate, they wanted to do it earlier and earlier. So they said, okay, liturgical reform should bring out the true nature of this thing. And they moved it, and they changed a lot of things about it. They moved it to the nighttime. And so now the rubric is it has to be done after dark, which makes sense because it's the nature of that liturgical experience to be about the holy fire and Christ coming into the darkness of the world and so on. Now you could say, oh, well, let's go back to 1920. But then you say, well, would we have then missed an authentic reform that actually increased the claritas of the event? Another thing for the extraordinary form, for instance, is most of the time, at least before Vatican II, people went to what we call the low mass. The low mass was the rubrics of the private mass. So you had monks in a monastery, and you might have 50 of them, and they have to say mass side by side, and they'd be 8 feet apart from each other because they're all saying mass at their own altar. And they can't sing the Gloria because there's somebody 6 feet away and there's no congregation. Somehow the rubrics for the private mass became the low mass. And people said, well, it's not really the nature of the mass to be said silently. It's a sung prayer. It's meant to be sung with vigor. The people have parts that say people in the missal, and they're not speaking them, they're not singing them. And so we have to increase the claritas of the mass precisely by reform. Now, if you get anti-reform as in a polemical thing, then you might actually lose the claritas. On the other hand, when people go to extraordinary reform, they see careful, attentive, prayerful people, devotion, incense, vestments. It looks important. It looks like they're doing something important. The holiness seems tangible, and that's good too. So my ideal world would be to say, okay, we have liturgical books in English, and that helps us understand a lot about what we're hearing, what we're singing, and we sing the words of the Gloria. We don't really have the old low mass anymore. Can we celebrate the current books, either in Latin or English, perhaps ad orientem, in a way that people, someone from Mars came in the church and said, they're doing something exquisite, beautiful, and ultimately, or of ultimate importance, and bring all the good that came with liturgical reform, and not keep, the misunderstandings that came from the 70s, where everything seemed to become trite and unimportant. So I know that's a long answer but it's a complicated question.
How do you think the catastrophe of post 1970 happened? Could it have been due to the magnitude of it? First of all, think like, all right, how does that happen? How do you get the ski lodge church, which was shocking that it's 2009? It is shocking they still haven't figured out that that's a problem. It's just amazing. But say that wasn't 2009. They say that's, I guess LA is not that old either, but say that's like 19, like, all right, St. Mary's, like 19 over across town, or this both from the 60s and 70s, like, all right, well, they were trying to do something and just kind of didn't work. But we get it. We get what they were trying to do. Even the liturgy itself, all right, we're like the Nova sort of like, oh, we get it. It's a kind of a dumbing down of the sacrificial nature of the Mass. They're trying to invite Protestants in. I get it. All right, that could have sounded like a good idea on paper. Maybe it probably should never have been done, but we kind of get it. But I guess the question would be, how did that happen? The catastrophe that led to the ski lodge church, and could it not have been? Is there any possibility that it was well intended, but went wrong, or it just seems like somebody did that on purpose, just due to how effectively everything was kind of torn apart?
Yeah, part of the reason that I insist on using the word ontology all the time, and in the world of philosophy, there's not agreement, and in fact, probably there's very little agreement with the things I'm saying. Right? People are denying that things even have an ontological character. But if you don't know what a church building is, because you don't know it's an image of the heavenly Jerusalem and it's made of gems and it's the new heaven and the new earth and all of that, then it becomes a functional building for the activity of the rite. So in the 19th century, when you read what people were writing, they're building old, beautiful looking traditional churches, but they don't really know why. Sort of, let's do a Gothic church because Gothic was pretty. And then that falls out of favor. And then the modernist architects come into the field and it's like, well, you're just building a stereotype from 500 years ago. Why don't you build something relevant to today? And the Catholics didn't have in their intellectual arsenal the argument to say a church building always shows the heavenly glory. They just didn't have it because we'd forgotten it. And so they just fell victim either to the budget, to practicality, or to the intellectuals of the architecture schools who were saying, we don't do that anymore. When it comes to liturgical reform, it's hard to know what people's motivations are, but there's certain people that, get beat up all the time. Annibale Bugnini being one of them, who was in charge of liturgical reform after the council. But the documents, as far as I can say, have no error. It says, keep what is good. Tradition is to be maintained. Latin is the language of the church. Gregorian chant is of the first thing to be sung. The post-conciliar documents say the same stuff. Why it didn't hit the ground that way is a very interesting question. And I have one or two thoughts about that. One of which is, before Vatican II, people had a low mass mentality, which was, I go to mass, the priest speaks silently, I say the rosary, and we don't sing, we don't have processions, We don't have a developed musical program. And it's my private time to say the rosary or to read my pious books. And then they got permission to read some hymns at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And what did they do when it was in English? Low mass, English, but it hadn't been in the blood already to say, oh, the high mass, as we think of it now, or the highly developed liturgical stuff was not our custom, precisely because the low mass mentality was there before Vatican II, and the low mass mentality is there after Vatican II. Just now it was more perceivable when those low mass abuses were happening. It's complicated business. But even Pope Benedict said, if you celebrated the current missal ad orientem in Latin with beautiful vestments, beautiful singing, beautiful ceremonial incense and all that, he said it would take a scholar of significant sophistication to know that it wasn't the extraordinary form. And that would be one way to say, okay, this is how we have continuity with the great tradition. But I think just putting your head in the sand and saying everything was great in 1962 or 1955 or 1855 is not nuanced enough, because there were some real liturgical problems and theological problems that needed to be addressed. And the fact that they got addressed badly doesn't undo the need to be addressed, in my mind.
Are you sure about the low mass mentality? Because the first church I was a priest at, I remember I was visiting a blind guy, and he had these newspapers, like really old newspapers. Well, I mean, not that old. I mean, they're from the 70s. And it was a regular newspaper from the town, and it was a big thing consistently, like almost like the Catholic Church always had that corner that said, High Mass, Solemn High Mass, this Sunday for St. Joseph, Solemn High Mass, or High Mass. And I was like, oh, could I take these old newspapers? I studied history as well. And he's like, no, I might need them. And I was like, but you're blind, so why would you? I was going to take them anyway because I thought he'd notice, but it didn't.
No, there were high masses, certainly. I'm not arguing that.
Where's that coming from, low mass type of thing? Because maybe that's kind of parts of Wisconsin they did that, but maybe not by and large.
Right, the high mass was long, and part of the old rules were if you had a high mass, you had to have a priest, you had to have a deacon, you had a subdeacon, and you had to sing everything. You had to sing the Graduale Romanum, you had to have a scola, and it was very hard to put that together. And so you had two options: high mass or low mass. Low mass, no singing, and not even speaking. You didn't even hear the priest speak except for a couple of words, and people didn't reply. And so most people went to the low mass because it was easier. And if a parish had a high mass at all, it might have been one on a Sunday. It might have been later in the day. People were hungry because they had the Eucharistic fast since midnight. And I wasn't alive at that time, but as I read the reformers' articles and journal entries and whatnot, they're all saying we have a low mass mentality. Even they weren't even thinking about Vatican II yet. This is in the 40s. And we have to get people to the high mass so they can have the fullness of the liturgy. And then when it came down to it, they said, well, can we really expect a little parish in who knows where, Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, to have a high mass on a Sunday? Probably not. So we have to come up with something that's in between that, that a small parish can do. And they came up with something called the Graduale Simplex, which was simpler chants. And the low mass was most people's experience most of the time, from what I understand. It doesn't mean high mass didn't exist. It just was much harder to find one, and then one done well.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you again for speaking, especially late at this night.
Sure.
And I guess my question is mostly just in the forum of beauty, especially having been saturated in the American culture. What do you think would be the best, way to engage our culture with beauty? What sort of mediums do you think we're lacking beauty in and could use that? And what sort of movements do you see going on where that is actually happening and working to encounter our culture in that way? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Good question. And it's a good question. And in some ways, it's an impossible question because everything should be beautiful, right? If we're talking about making everything the fullness of what it is by its nature, then it has its compelling power. So if I said, make delicious food, you wouldn't say, well, do I just, what do I do with this food? People would just flock to you, right? Maybe you could give it away. Maybe you could have a sample. Maybe you could invite people to your cookie factory, right? So you can do things to lead the horse to water, so to speak. But letting the thing itself be what it is by its very nature, I think in many ways starts with the individual Christian. Do I love my neighbor? Do I live a life of joy? Do I invite people to share that joy? Do they see the radiance of delight in your face and say, I don't know what you got, but I want that, right? Because you're happy. And does that come out with the fullness of the Christian concern for the poor? We should be loving the poor, and we should take the poor to a beautiful Latin high mass, right? And you say, oh, here's this holistic view. But that all requires having the knowledge of what things are and the courage to make those choices. A lot of the world is not patient with, beautiful liturgy, for instance, they'll call you a throwback or preconciliar or whatever. So know your stuff, live it as beautifully as you can. Start with a heart that loves God and loves neighbor. And then I think when the church is actually revealed in its nature, it draws people to itself. Christ says, when I'm raised up, I will draw people to myself. So we have to be that Christ and make that Christ knowable in fullness, charity, and then the beauty is the natural result. If you cook your food properly with the right ingredients, delicious just happens. And when we do things right in Catholicism, beauty just happens, and then it draws people to itself, like the smell of a bakery. You just sniff that air, and then you're like, I want to go there. Can we be that for the world?
Hi. So one common argument, I grew up in a asymmetric church that, wouldn't be kind of traditionally beautiful, as you've put it. But one argument that I hear a lot when I kind of found out what beauty truly is, was the argument of it. It does speak to some people. Like, some people appreciate that ambiguity or subtlety almost,
Mm-hmm.
and the deeper meaning. It's not so in your face. Or so. What do you think is the best argument against that? Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, that's always the balance between the fullness of objective reality and then what does the person who's facing that need. So, St. Paul talks about, the baby food sort of that he gives at first, and then he wants them to rise up to some more substantial food. And there's a lot of possible gradations. So, a group of Trappists might make a church that doesn't have any mosaics in it because they've chosen this austerity of life. That's beautiful for them. A cathedral, which has to signify the importance of the whole diocese, will have more complexity, and that's beautiful for its subcategory of ontology. You can't please everybody, but I think you'd have to ask the question, is the deficiency in the person why they don't like it, or is the deficiency in the object? And that's a hard thing to do. I mean, if you met someone on the street, you might not just, open up the Summa and start reading it. You might start with very basic things, but hopefully they'll get to the higher point. But I think the bottom line always has to be whether or not any particular individual person prefers something. Can the argument be made that it is built, designed, and reveals according to its nature? And then it's up to the other person to be conformed to it rather than it to be conformed to their lack of understanding or their particular preference. Liturgical things by nature are they ask us to conform to them. And, a football pep rally is exciting, but you have to play the game the way it's played. So we have the devotional life of the church to get us all excited according to our personal preference. But then when it comes to liturgy, you can't just sing whatever song you want, right? The church gives us established things. And I think that works in other liturgical ways as well. The pastoral implementation of that is difficult. You can't move too fast or people are going to feel excluded. How do you bring people to the fullness of the understanding, but always with that objective in mind that there is a fullness of understanding. And if someone's not there yet, you don't give up your own tradition just because someone isn't where they should be yet. That's how I would think about it.
Hello. You talk about something's beauty as being proportional to its reality and being. Is that like something's capacity for beauty? Because an evil person could be evil, go around doing terrible things, versus you might have like a deer or a cow that's living out its fullest purpose in being just very regularly. So yeah, the question of it's a capacity to beauty, right? Is proportional to something's participation in being, not necessarily its inherent beauty.
Yeah, in the pure sense, yeah, you could say you could have a really debased person who has reverted back to their animal condition, right? And they're only concerned about the lower appetites, or they're murdering people. So, is it possible for a particular example of a person to be less beautiful than a really, perfect buffalo? Well, probably not. A buffalo is never going to have intellect and will and all the things that a person has. But I think theoretically, you would say it's possible that there's a range within each category of being for a really good one and a really not so good one. Is Satan worse than Bambi? Well, I don't know. More beautiful in the sense that Satan has all kinds of powers that Bambi doesn't have, but he's using them wrong. And I guess somehow you just have to get a bunch of smart people in a room and kind of tease that out. If I'm understanding your question correctly, there's a capacity for the fullness that humans have that's theoretically higher, yes, but they might not be using it well, and therefore they wouldn't actually have that beauty. And that's if that's your question, I think that's a good point to make.
Follow up on that. In the hierarchy of participating and being, which at the top is God. God is all these things. Like a rock shares partially in the this. It doesn't not exist, and so therefore it partially shares. But where would you intellectually think that works of art would place creations by humans, say whether like a rock and then it gets carved up by a human to look like something? Is that that's obviously it's taking on some parts of reality of its artists. So does where's that fall like in relation to like Mother Teresa's beauty? Like how would you say I guess the church isn't isn't a creation of an individual. It's built by lots of people, but say like a painting by a painter, how would those compare?
Well, traditionally, sacred art was considered the highest, and not only paintings of sort of sacred history or sacred pious things, but art that was actually approaching that characteristic of sacrament. So sacrament is the use in the broadest possible sense. We have the 7 sacraments of the church, but in the broadest possible sense, the sacramental thing uses matter to make active and present some otherwise insensible or invisible spiritual reality. So you paint a picture of a bowl of apples, it's not really rendering something heavenly present in the room. And you already have the apples, right? So it's a picture of a thing. Art that actually becomes transparent to something that's not in the room. So the Virgin Mary, the face of Christ, an angel, a saint, the glory of God, the heavenly Jerusalem, that would be considered more beautiful because it's actually becoming a sacramental revelation of something higher and better, and then you can work your way down. So in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, sacred art was the highest. In the 18th century, history became the highest kind of painting. You see George Washington signing documents or, crossing the Delaware or whatever. because the faith was removed from secular life, and then history painting rose because it was the human activities of inspiration that were the highest. And so our subjective response is very much formative in how the art world thinks about the value of something. If you look at a magazine now and you see some canvas and there's the blip of something on it, and someone says, the artist says, well, I just wanted one person to have an emotional response to this, and then I know I've succeeded. That traditionally would be considered very low, very unbeautiful. Well, what response is it? Is it a response to murder? Is it a response to love God? Is it a response, to have a Twinkie? I mean, what is it? Who knows? Who cares? You move up higher. Oh, this person loves God more. This person understands virtuous living. And finally, this art actually produces love or generates love in the person by letting them encounter the things of heaven. That would be considered the most beautiful. And then the sort of chain of participation would go down from there.
So art that reveals things. So like as a church is supposed to reveal parts of heaven, it through revealing that it's participating in the beingness of heaven in some way.
Right. And yeah,
be elevated above, say, like an individual human with just their own human will and intellect.
Right. So an icon, for instance, as the Easterners develop that theology, is trying to show the saint as they exist in heaven and rendering that present in the world. It's not the same. A portrait of that person while they were alive would be considered a lesser thing because you're only seeing their humanity, as opposed to encountering their share in Christ's divinity, and that therefore would make it kind of a sacrament. They call it a sacrament, actually, in Eastern churches. That matter and lets those things actively be in the room with you, not just remind you of something. Golden arches don't give you hamburgers, right? They just say hamburgers over there, where the icon would be the hamburger, right? Just the heavenly thing that's coming through in its fullness. And that would be considered more beautiful because it's revealing more of the full ontology of a saint, not just a reminder that some person did something good on earth hundreds of years ago.
That beauty of that icon compared to the actual physical body of that saint when they were alive.
Yeah, well, a good question, because the Eastern theology is a little funny. They're very interested in beauty. They're very interested in revelation of ontology. They're also very afraid of idolatry. They had what's called the iconoclastic controversies a long time ago, in the 8th century, 9th century, and they were worried about making idols. If a thing looks too beautiful, then we're tempted to worship the object rather than the thing that the object represents. So icons always look slightly funny. The skin tone is a little weird. They don't look like human beings in the sexy sense, like no icon is ever going to be on the wall of a 14-year-old boy's bedroom. I mean, it's not what it does. It's meant to show that they're outside of time, they're outside of space, and they look a little funny. And so it's the fact that they look funny and look less earthly beautiful that makes them more beautiful, because you're realizing they're not in our realm of space and time, and they're not living in our realm of emotional stimulation. And so it's that dryness that they call, it's like an ascetic discipline to look at an icon, that actually makes them more beautiful, even though it makes them less pretty. And that's an interesting distinction between pretty and beautiful. Pretty tends to generate emotional response, where beautiful things tend to calm the passions, soothe the passions, let the mind be stronger against the fallen passions, and then would be, more iconic in that sense, and in this system of things, more beautiful.
Thank you very much.